Shana Tova. Good evening, everyone. Hello to everyone who is joining us from near and far. We opened our service with a poem that is sung once a year in Jewish communities in the Middle East and North Africa in the twilight of Rosh Hashanah Eve, in the nebulous space between the year that was and the year that will be. Achot Ketana, or little sister. The verses address indignities that we face through the year with the refrain, "Let the year and its curses conclude," except for the final verse which shifts to looking forward and declares, "Let the year and its blessings begin." Tachel Shana Uvirchotea. I remember the year after high school, studying in the old city of Jerusalem. The entire yeshiva and the surrounding community sat there in the Beit Midrash, in the study hall. Out the window, we watched the Kotel, the western wall, ablaze with the warm hues of the setting sun, as the service leader started to sing the Moroccan melody that we sang moments ago. The air in the yeshiva was electric. We had spent so much time preparing for this moment, spiritually and physically, for the inner work of Rosh Hashanah. In that moment, on the threshold of the new year, neither in the past one anymore, and not yet in the new one, there was a thrilling sense that anything could happen. In the entrance to any home, at the bottom of the door frame is a threshold delineating the transition from outside the home to inside it. This evening, we stand again on the threshold of a new year. Rather than stepping right in, let's tarry here a moment. There is wisdom in this space between. We Jews love rituals. It is through rituals that we make and mark meaning. This is particularly so in times of transition in the lives of an individual or a group. This is true not only for all communities of faith, but for all societies. Whether formal or informal, in any society you'll find rituals around birth and death, rites of passage, changes in primary relationships, graduation, and more. Collectively, you might find rituals when a community or an organization inhabits a new space or breaks ground on a building, or when there is change in leadership, such as inaugurating a head of state. We tend to think of such transitions as moving from one clear state to another. A wedding, for example, changes the personal status of two individuals from single to married. But real change is not as clear-cut. On the way from what came before to what comes after, there is the great unformed middle. We can think of all transitions as happening in three stages. As anthropologist Arnold van Gennep described it, every transition begins with a separation, when who you once understood yourself to be no longer fits, and there is a symbolic break with the past. And all transitions end with incorporation, the point when you are able to integrate the change and re-enter society with a solid new identity. Between those is the period in which you have left behind your old familiar identity, but have not yet fully figured out who you are meant to be next. Van Gennep called this middle stage liminality, from the Latin word for threshold. And like a physical threshold, it is neither in the old space nor the new. Yet it has to be crossed in order to complete the transition. Liminal moments can be filled with deep discomfort, even dread. But if we are willing to linger there with intention, we will find that profound change is possible in these spaces. Earlier this summer, as Rabbi Annie and I were preparing to leave Philadelphia for Gaithersburg, we thought a lot about liminality. After 9 years establishing a life for ourselves, building our professional identities, forming lasting friendships, starting a family, we were setting out to start anew. It has been exhilarating and, yes, sometimes frightening time. And on our final day in Philadelphia, as the physical stuff of our lives was literally on trucks between our former Philly home and the Gaithersburg home we would soon inhabit, Rabbi Annie shared with me a parable about a trapeze artist. The author, Dana Perry, marvels at how a trapeze artist first learns to release the bar that is fully in hand and to hang in midair as a new one arrives. Think about it. How do you learn to just let go? Our culture, he notes, is distinctly averse to hanging in the space between the bars. We know the security of the old bar, and we trust that the new bar, the new opportunity, the new initiative can be solid too, but the space between, the void, we tend to do all sorts of things to avoid the void because it's scary, it's confusing. We treat it as a disorienting nowhere that must be gotten through as fast and as unconsciously as possible, and in so doing, we miss out on the possibility for growth and transformation along the way. This year that we are now entering, 5782, is one long transition zone. This year is a Shmitah year. According to the Torah, every seventh year is observed as a sabbatical year. In Hebrew, a year of Shmitah, literally a year of rest and release. For a year, ancient Israel would reset agricultural, economic, and social norms rooted in our Torah's aspirational values. A host of agricultural and economic adjustments were made to ensure the maintenance of an equitable, just, and healthy society. Israelite farmers would let their land lie dormant. All agricultural activities, including plowing, planting, pruning, and harvesting, ceased. They would release their holdings on land, and all debt would be relinquished. For a year, our ancestors would live only off of what they had stored up or what grew wild, trusting that they had enough. During this time, the land and the people would benefit from the fallow season. The practice was valuable for sustainable agriculture, as borne out by current practices of permaculture, but it also served as a powerful, embodied, ethical, and spiritual practice whose lesson endures for us today. At every level of community and society, we are today in a moment of liminality. In so many ways, we are stuck in between. We are not who we were before the pandemic, and our paradigms have all been disrupted. We work differently. We pray differently. We learn differently. We socialize differently. We know that we're not going to go back to normal. And yet, it's not clear who we are becoming. What are the contours of the paradigms of our new reality, or how we will come to organize our sense of self, personally and collectively? It's true in the broader American society and Jewish communal life, and on a global level as well. And it is true for our Shari Torah community. The arrival of Shmitah invites us to pause a while longer rather than to rush through this liminal period to get to what comes next. Thank God, the worst of the pandemic is behind us. In fits and in starts, we are opening up again. Here at Sharei Torah, we are so grateful that to a certain degree, many of us have been able to gather in person in ways that we have not been able to do in a year and a half. We have farther to go because those who are immunocompromised or unable medically to receive a vaccine cannot yet safely join us, but what a difference it is from last year. We are all eager to move forward into the next exciting stage of our holy community's growth. And even as we return and rejoice, Shmitah calls us to release into this space of uncertainty and embrace the wildly unimaginable blessings that can come and emerge in the in-between. As the late Isaac Stern put it, music is what goes on between the notes. In the mandated release of Shmitah, our ancestral farmers were called to embrace the power of dormancy, an essential stage in the cycle of life of organisms throughout nature. The heart rests after a beat. The animal hibernates, waiting out the winter. And Shmitah calls on us to rest every 7 years, to experience this power of dormancy. Rabbi David Ingber writes, "There are seeds inside each and every one of us, inside this culture that cannot emerge because we do not know that dormancy does not mean death. Resting does not mean disappearing. What keeps us from stopping is that we are terrified of resting. We are afraid of the imaginative, terrible things we will feel in the quiet. We fear that when we stop, even for a moment, the sheer enormity of our lives will overwhelm us. Our outspoken and unspoken fears, they speed up our lives like a stone being thrown over a lake. We've learned to skip so we don't get too wet. And we are terrified that if we let the stone fall, we will disappear. And so we think that our speed will save us from the void. We dance around the security that is offered from touching what is underneath the speed. On a personal level, as we enter the new year, I want to invite each of us to reflect on what practical wisdom we might glean from Shmitah. What might it look like for you to invite release and dormancy into your life? As part of your personal spiritual practice, are there any areas of your life where you can intentionally slow down and create more space to see what gifts may emerge? It is true that if we slow down, we may find new creative inspiration and generativity in our life. But there is also a more profound lesson of Shmitah, and that is we release because we are not defined by our productivity. We are so much more than what we do and what we make. Together, we arrive at Shmitah 5782 at a powerful moment of transition and potential for Sharei Torah. We undertook a strategic planning initiative 10 years ago, Sharei Torah 2020, that laid out a vision for our community through the year 2020, a values-based vision that represented the spirit and hopes of our congregation, setting the course of our path for a decade. Following the path that was forged, we grew and we thrived. When Rabbi Jacob Blumenthal transitioned into the role of founding rabbi to lead our movement as CEO of the United Synagogue and the Rabbinical Assembly, our leaders set out on a rabbinic search rooted in that vision and in the wealth of conversations with the members of Sharei Torah about what leadership looks like for our community in this moment. Along the way, the COVID pandemic was an unprecedented moment of adversity for our community, as it was for communities around the world. It's been a time of searing loss and hardship for so many in our community. And in the 2 months that Rabbi Annie and I have been here, we've been inspired by the ways our lay leaders and staff, along with support from Rabbi Mark and others, stepped up to lead us through developing new strengths and drawing on inner resources we didn't even know we had. People reached out to each other in new ways, checking in on each other's welfare through the Chesed Committee and on their own. People donated funds and time to ensure that not only would we get through this moment of disruption and uncertainty, but that we would be ready to soar when the pandemic eased and the rabbinic search was complete. And as the rhythms of life speed up again, let's not forget that the past year and a half has been extremely hard. So many of us are starting this year exhausted, and the pandemic is not over yet. As we wait for our young children to receive a vaccine, COVID-19 and the Delta variant continues to spread and overwhelm medical facilities and professionals in municipalities around the country. We are tired by the length of the pandemic. We're tired of masking. We are fatigued by Zoom. Many of us continue to experience isolation, loneliness, and depression. We're all a little burnt out. But if we want our light to shine bright for a long time to come, rather than simply pushing onward, let's identify and replenish what most nourishes us. Rather than skipping a stone over the lake, let's go deep together. Rather than rushing to answer all the questions or even to ask them, let's slow down. Let's gather at this threshold to look inward, to understand who we are in this moment, and to discern together the pressing questions that are emerging. What an exciting moment it is in the life of our Kihila Kedosha, our holy Shari Torah community. We're gearing up to celebrate our 25th anniversary year, just as you've welcomed 2 new rabbis. Rabbi Annie and I are eager to help Shari Torah to grow and thrive for another 25 years, to help pave the next stage of our path together. And we're humbled to have been entrusted with leadership here at Shari Torah. As your rabbis, we could simply lay out a vision that we would run with together. But for any vision for Shari Torah to succeed, it will need to emerge organically, rooted in a deep appreciation of what makes Shari Torah unique. There is so much this community has learned about ourselves implicitly since our founding, and particularly since we stopped to reflect fundamentally on who we are a decade ago. We now have a precious opportunity to glean and internalize the lessons we've learned. So let's take time to tell and retell the story of Shari Torah, to fully appreciate where we have come from and who we are now, lifting up all the varied voices and experience of our diverse membership, both our veteran members and our newer ones. Together, we will honor our shared past and celebrate our future. Let us each use this year of release wisely to discern, each of us and together, what pressing questions are emerging in this moment and who we are being called to become. Let's listen for the music in the silence. Let's see what seeds will emerge from honoring dormancy, so that we may set forth with intention, forethought, and strength to build our bright future together. May it be a healthy and sweet new year. Happy 5782. Let the year and its blessings begin.